Hello, you guys, and welcome back to Ambitious. So today we are joined by a guest, one of my absolute dear and best friends, Gabi. And I have to give you a little intro and a little bio about her before we dive into all the goodness that is unpacking what the reality is to scale an agency. So I want to give you a little bit of timeline about Gabi very quickly to kind of give you some perspective about how she came to be the CEO of the agency that she has today. So in 2017 to 2020, she was, as many people when they start before an agency, a solo service provider who was a freelancer and specifically was assisting with social media management. And so then fast forward to December 2020, she stopped being solo and really stepped into that identity and that role for herself as a CEO. Her services at this time expanded to virtual assistant type services, social media management, as well as graphic design. So fast forward 1 year later, 2021, she continued to grow and actually then shifted to becoming, yes, a team of 7 people. And so I want to help you to really understand all of the different aspects of what it took to go from solopreneur all the way to a scaled team of 7 agency that is absolutely crushing it in multiple different departments, might I add. One of the things that we covered in today's episode was going over the concept of not having necessarily a super specific, super contained niche in the idea of capping the areas of which you could support clients. We're going to be diving into team, and we're going to be talking about pricing and packages and all the different ways that you can optimize your current service or your current agency to really take it to the next level. So this was a really, really juicy one. You're going to want to get out a notepad if you are somebody who has an agency or you're currently a service provider, because this is basically a masterclass on how to scale an agency, and you're going to want to take some notes along the way. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode.
Hello, you guys, and welcome back to Ambitious. So I am here today with Gabs, who is actually, I will have you know, I was thinking about this when I was quickly peeing before we started recording. You are actually the first person who's ever come back twice.
It's an honor.
Ever.
It's an honor.
An honor. And so if you guys hear us with some cans, we basically turned Gabi's loft in her house here in Calgary into like a baby podcast studio. So we basically took over and just moved all her furniture. And one of the things that has come up since staying here was that she introduced me to Alani, which is technically like an energy drink company.
There are a lot of things. They have pre-workout. They have like protein bars, everything.
Well, she has a small convenience store in her house. And because of that, she has this mini fridge of all these different flavors. And so I'm working my way through. If you guys hear the nice crisp, yes. The nice crisp. Cheers. Cheers. I'm trying the peach one today. I've tried the other ones. They're all delicious.
What do you think? Juice. Adult juice, as you would say. So you don't like caramel apple?
No.
Oh.
I don't know what it is. Apple, watermelon, cherry. Like there's certain flavors in drinks. I can't eat them. Different story.
Okay.
The peach I can give thumbs up is good to go. It's so good. I am, if you guys are watching this, wearing the most interesting little headset because we didn't have enough mics to have just like a separate mic. So I have, and if you're listening to this, it's almost giving McDonald's take your order. It's really quite a vibe. So I'm going to see how I feel about it. And if you guys see me with microphone headset in the next episodes, then you will know how this unfolded.
Like you basically can go on stage right now and like have a full on performance.
I like how free I am with my hands. I can hear everything. The mic, I don't have to go closer or further away. Like it's actually quite good for me to have mobility while I'm doing this. This is good. But a little bit of the context. So on the last episode that Gabs came on, we were talking a lot about her influencer side of her business. So she has 2 arms to her business. And in that episode, we really unpacked the 101 of everything you need to know as it pertains to considering being an influencer, the realities behind the curtain of being an influencer, and all of those pieces. But in us chatting, in just all of our off time, we're like, there's so much that we haven't gotten into in her story, which is the other arm of her and her business and what she's done, which is her agency. And you guys are in the DMs, which I love, by the way. I love hearing from you guys, the questions you have, the topics you'd love to hear about. And one of the big things that has come up is how I actually scale an agency. Like I feel like my agency is stuck. I feel like I don't really know how to go to the next level. And Gabs has actually completely crushed it in the last couple of years with her agency. She has worked with a lot of my clients, a lot of my peers, and we've had the absolute pleasure of kind of like swapping services, I guess I would say, because I've coached her on some of her stuff. She's done for you stuff for my business. And so Gabs, welcome back.
So happy to be here. So happy to be here. In person too.
In person too, even better. So we just had our episode actually go out very recently that was like a case study of an agency, and it brought in a lot of questions about like, this all seems like common problems everyone's having. And so like maybe you can give like a high level. We talked a lot on the last episode about the influencer side of your business, but like maybe you can give people a super high level of kind of like the evolution of your agency, like kind of how it came to be and where it's at today.
Yeah. So I started as a freelancer. I was doing all the different things that I could, just trying to get my business off the ground so I could stop working for corporate. And then in December 2020, COVID happened, and that was a great opportunity for us to become an agency. I didn't really label it agency at the time. I was just like, I just want to grow a team because I can't work by myself anymore. And then we became an agency, and we scaled to being like a team of, I want to say 4 within like 6 months or so.
Wow.
So it was fairly quick that we scaled the team size, and today we're a team of 8. And I think something that's very different is my team members are exclusive to a sister agency, so they don't work with any other clients or another agency or anything like that. So yeah, we are a done for you service agency that caters to a lot of the different back end things that a business might need, and it's very different for sure from a lot of other agencies.
Yeah, and like obviously with doubling your team, it scaled pretty quickly then.
Yeah. It was one of those things, like I said, I was like, oh, I'm just hiring some team members, and then it became, okay, figure out how to be a leader.
Yeah.
Figure out how to manage different people, figure out how to please everyone, figure out how to please yourself too in the mix of it. So a lot of leadership and team culture things came up a lot faster than I was expecting, and just like a lot more to kind of deal with came up before I was even ready for it.
Well, I remember one of the first things like when we started working together, which I was like, okay, like now you've got my attention, is when you're like, I don't really like want to like niche. And I was like, interesting. So like, let's dive in. And so obviously, you guys have heard me on other episodes talk about like, pro niche, anti niche. And so I think there's kind of 2 sides as I see it. I see the people who go super, super specific in the sense of like, I have a very one specific track of what I want to do, and they're super, super niche. And then there's people who also will go so broad and wide in the sense of like they can really do everything. And so like when you were kind of thinking about crafting the agency and crafting like who you guys were and what you were going to offer, how did you kind of navigate that? Like what made you lean toward more of like the anti-niche, if you will?
Honestly, it comes down to who I was myself. Like I was very much a multi-passionate individual at the time. And I was, like I said, doing everything that I could that was available to do online as I was building up my own freelancing business. And so when I became an agency, I said, I want to keep that even now being an agency. And so I said, well, we're going to just offer everything that we've already offered being a solo person. So I've kind of kept it that way. And then I've also just been open to helping whoever I can. It doesn't matter who you are or what you do. If we can solve that problem, like we'll do it. But yeah, when it comes down to the niche, I've just been so anti-niche for so long because I just feel like that's just such a small box to live in so many different ways. And so I think it's been a great thing. And there's also some cons to it that we can definitely unpack today too. But yeah, I think it just stemmed from my own personal belief that like I didn't want to be only doing one thing or serving one pod, I guess you could say. And so that's kind of where it came from. It was just like, it was more of a personal choice than anything, that is not something that I stood for.
Yeah, we were even like talking the other day because Gabs also does consulting. So she basically coaches other people who are looking to build agencies and wanting to scale agencies as well. And so we were just kind of chatting and going back and forth around strategy stuff. And we opened up the conversation of the idea of like really creating your business and your packages and your products really based off of problems.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I see with your agency that really frankly is quite different than others is like you guys saw not just a section of the problems that entrepreneurs were dealing with, but you're like, they're having issues in marketing and delivery and sales and team and backend. So it's like, why would they need to hire a separate person to build systems when they also need someone to do their podcast, but they also need someone to help build their course? Like before your type of agency, it really was something that you had to hire like a generalized VA or something along that line to really get that type of work done. And the interesting thing that I've seen with your agency specifically was like, there's specialists who do those. Like you don't just have a bunch of generalists on your team. Like you really have filled every single bucket. And so like for you, kind of to your note earlier, what are some, I guess, like the resistances or like cons that you've basically experienced in being like, obviously it's a massive benefit. So many people I know have worked with you and been able to get like 5 different areas in their business managed by you in one place, which is amazing as the consumer, no question.
Yeah.
But I'm sure on the delivery side, it makes it a lot to be
Mhm.
able to handle all of that. So like, what does it look like as to the things that you feel like have been kind of resistant in doing it?
Marketing is definitely my biggest issue in being so broad and being in all the different buckets, because yes, you've coached me to like look at the problem only and like, know that there's just multiple ways to solve that, but I'm still talking to so many different people. And so that's probably the biggest struggle that we have, being the agency that we are, is that like I've had many people be like, I did not know you do this, because they've only
Mm.
known us for maybe 2 out of the 5 things, right?
Mhm.
And it's really hard to relay that on a daily basis, I guess, unless someone actually takes the time to like binge through everything kind of thing. But I think that's the biggest one, is just like being able to make our services aware, because there are so many different ones.
Mm.
That's probably our biggest one. And then I would say we make new services on the go too, like it wasn't really a service, but we have the
We
skills
have
for
custom dishes every night of the
Yeah.
week. Every night of the
That's
week.
pretty much what it is, to be honest,
Yeah.
because when you have so many experts on a team and like, familiarity of the client and like the businesses, and if they come up with a new problem, you're like, well, let's just introduce this new service and this new way of helping you
Mm.
with that, right? So I think that's the challenge, is that because you feel so free to do everything that falls under like back end,
Mhm.
that's literally so many different things. So it's kind of trying to keep a cap on it too is a struggle. And like even just categorizing all the different things that we do under different categories is hard too, because it's like just so many.
Well, like, how do you navigate? Because I feel like a lot of business owners have that. Like, I think one of the downsides of being an entrepreneur in general is like you just see opportunity everywhere. You go to get a
Mhm.
donut and you see branding. You know what I mean? Like, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, for you, how do you navigate when to say no then?
Hmm.
Like, how do you navigate when the impact or the consequence to the
Yeah.
business outweighs the opportunity of being able to solve another problem for the client?
I think that's being aware of like where we really excel, versus where we don't.
Mm.
And then also, what we enjoy doing as well. I think that's a big thing that's important to me too, is that the team enjoys what we're doing. Obviously, just like when you go to any regular job, there's some things that you love, there's some things that you don't.
Mhm.
But I think it's also important that when I do make a decision to introduce a new service, it's like, does it really align with, you and like where you want the company to go and like all the other services that you already have. And so, yeah, it's definitely a challenge for anybody, not even just an agency, but I think it's really just evaluating like, does this actually make sense?
Mm.
Or are you just doing it because you just want to please the client and please the issue at hand right now?
Well, I know like one of the biggest things that I've seen with your business, kind of on that same note, is like pleasing the client. Like one thing I know, which is why you've worked with so many people that I know, and like we work with you and we refer people to you, is because of like delivery.
Yeah.
Because I know one of the tricky parts about scaling an agency is that there typically is an aspect of team
Mhm.
and delegating to people, and not necessarily the person that's selling you or the person that you're interacting with being the one who actually does the service, right?
Mhm.
And so obviously with doubling your team, starting with you, then it being 4 people, then it going into 8 people, like for you, you guys have like boatloads of referrals and renewals coming in left, right, and center. And so when you guys think about really delivering like high quality service to people,
Yeah.
do you find that difficult at times because you do so many things? Or like how do you guys kind of navigate ensuring high quality service when you have your hands in quite a few things at the same time?
I mean, it's all the same principle and value that we go into everything that we do. No matter how big or small the thing that we're doing is, we always want to give the delivery that we want the client to experience. And so I don't think that really changes that at all. I do think that they do all fall under the same kind of blanket in a way, like it will, like even if it is like a different service that we didn't have or like multiple, right? But at the end of the day, like just the client experience is very, very important to us, no matter what service that is, whatever task that is too. So it is a challenge sometimes, especially if it's a newer one versus something that we've done like for forever. But I mean, as long as we're exercising the same way that we would approach anything, I think it's makes it doable for sure.
Mm.
And I think that there's lessons in it too. There's sometimes that we've definitely bit off more than we could chew. And that becomes a great lesson for us to just be able to learn and then move forward from that. So sometimes you don't know either. Sometimes you just have to take that chance and just see what happens. But yeah.
Well, in connection to delivery, like obviously in you coaching agencies, and then like Gabi does coaching inside of our program, IT Accelerator as well. And so you have access to seeing behind the curtain of a lot of agencies,
Yeah.
and then also coaching agencies and having one of your own. What do you think is the biggest missed mark when it comes to delivery in most agencies that you see? Like, where do you think people who have agencies or even service providers who are looking to kind of step into that, what is something that you would say is kind of like the differentiator that really makes it work when it comes to giving a really, really good quality experience, or key things that someone might want to dive into or focus on if they want to make theirs better?
I think really caring, genuinely caring about the outcome. And I say that and I really mean it. I think people are very fixated on just like the actual deliverable and like very transactional kind of
Mm,
partnership with their clients. And I think what makes us very different is the fact that we actually say that we're in a partnership with you instead. Because I think that really making sure that, you know, the client knows how much you care about their business is another thing than just like giving them a service, giving them podcast clips or whatever that might be. You know, like I think there's that level of depth in a relationship that's very important for whether you're an agency or not. But I think that's a very important thing in client delivery is like just actually really genuinely caring and also going above and beyond to a certain extent as well. And
mhm,
also just making sure that the experience is good from start to finish, from the minute that they get off a call with you, from the minute that they onboard, I think is very, very important. And like, you know, just that interaction that you have with them too, like communication, that's a big one that I think a
mhm,
lot of agencies, service providers do fall short on is like communicating with their client. They just kind of like don't keep them in the loop on like what's going on. I think that's a big one. So like really over communicating is very important to us,
mm,
and really, you know, emphasizing the why behind certain things that we do or don't do, I think is very important too. Because it's not that people aren't open to why you're not doing something or the way that you're doing something. So sometimes they're just curious. So I think that's another important thing that has really elevated the client experience is just really having your clients inside our brain a little bit more,
mm.
because especially if they've come from another agency or another service
Yeah.
provider, they're like, why are we doing it like this when I'm used to doing it this way? And it's like, well, because X, Y, and Z. So I think that's very important as well, is that you really like get your client on the same page as you as to like, yeah, how you go about things. And I mean, hopefully that's conversations that you have with them even before you know sign that
Yeah.
contract and enter that partnership. But I think that's also a very important one. And I think just like high touch points, like I know some might disagree with how much we are in Slack for sure, but I do think that it has been something that's made us very different in that sense, because there's never a guesswork of are they doing what they're supposed to do.
Mm,
And I think, like I said, like the over delivering part, like there's certain things that we'll do that like weren't technically on paper or like promised or anything, but like we saw an opportunity and we did that for that client. And I think clients really appreciate that because, like I said earlier, it goes back to how much you truly care about their business and you're not just there for that transactional exchange. And I think that's
mm,
something that really needs to change in the online service world, is that everything is so transactional. And I think that's what's really cultivated the long-term partnerships and relationships that we have with our clients, is because we have been there with them through a lot of different things in their business, the ups, the downs, all of it. And because they've allowed us to be part of that, I think has is what really, you know, cultivates such strong partnerships there. And it just all comes down to treating clients as humans, not just an invoice.
contracts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a
Yeah.
big thing that I love to emphasize when I have the opportunity to, is that like the more that you can put a human element to like what you do, in just the way that like you would want to be treated as a person at the store or when you go get a service here in whatever city you're in, you know, just like really applying that in the online world too. I think that's something
Mhm.
that we've lost sight of a bit on the online world, is like that we're all behind screens and that's it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, no, like we all have emotions, we all have you know, we all crave that connection and stuff. So I do think that that's another thing. And I know that doesn't really sound like tactical advice, but I think it's just like something that's really made us different, is like you might be more skilled at us at something that we do as an agency, like if you're a competing agency, but we have a different level of like love and connection with our clients that you can't teach that either. It has to be something that is important to you.
Yeah.
And I think because we've cultivated that in our team, you know, core values, it really does show with whatever team member you work with on our agency. We
It's
all are the
consistent.
same. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very important takeaway that I'd love to share with agencies or freelancers or anybody really, is that just remember that we are all human, and that is truly what's going to get you far in the services that you have to provide and the skill sets that you have to offer.
Well, it's interesting that you say that about the communication, because I was talking to an agency owner this week who has like a multiple seven-figure agency. And listen, like all of us have those moments behind the scenes, especially with your coach, where you're like, if this client messages me one
One more
more time.
time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so, anyways, we were having that conversation. And it was interesting because the comment that came through was like, they just need to let me do my job. Like,
Mhm.
just get out of the way, stop asking questions. And I hear this of all different industries. Like, I hear it in ads, I hear it in social media space and social media management of like the clients asking, like, why are we editing it this way? And
Mhm.
why are we writing the captions this way? And why are we posting at this time? And so it's interesting that you say that about keeping the clients in the loop,
Mhm.
because I think the biggest thing that people have the misconception of when it comes to an agency is like, oh, they're delegating it to us.
Yeah.
Let us do our job. But if you even think about delegating to an internal team, like obviously people are delegating to you guys as an outside team and resource for them. But if you're going to delegate to an internal team, there's still a minimum aspect of communication that you would want to have a high level understanding of what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
So like obviously you don't want them micromanaging you, but I loved that you shared that, because I think agency owners often get frustrated that the clients are asking questions and they perceive it to be that they don't trust us. They won't let
Mhm.
us do our job. They're trying to get in the way. And really for you, what I'm hearing you say is that like basically by doing not only are you actually deepening the relationship with your client, you're working them into your process with you, but you're also like making them part of the experience. Like you're
Yeah.
not just like, hey, give us your tasks
Yeah.
and we'll do that for you. It's like, hey, like as to your point earlier, we're a partnership in your business and we're going to kind of like educate you along the way while also giving you support in the areas that you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think agency owners, like, it's fair that they're like, why do you do it that way?
Yeah.
Why not? Why can't they ask that? You know what I mean? Like, unless you got something to hide, why not have them ask you?
Well,
Like,
I think it's the idea of like communication, right?
yeah.
Like to your point of like maybe we're in Slack more than most people. I think that the interesting about scaling is that often people want the answer, but they don't like the answer they get.
Mhm.
Which is like, if you want to scale an agency, you obviously want to have as one of the core aspects of it retention and referrals and
Yeah.
renewals, which obviously you guys have tons of and you have for years. And that's a testament to your delivery. But if you're like, hey, you want the renewals, the referrals, and all the people who come back time and time again, i.e., monthly recurring revenue, the main thing you need to focus on is the relationship with your client and not
100%.
just the deliverable. And they're like, yeah, but what else is the first thing
Nothing.
that happens,
Nothing
right?
else. Well, okay, not nothing else, but like, you know what I mean? Like that is the core of it, is like build that relationship. You know, it's like the same thing, like why you keep the same hairdresser for so long or why you keep the personal trainer for so long. Well, because they've gotten to know you and you've gotten to know them and build this trust together that no matter what journey you're on in your life, aka your business, I'm going to go to you for that, right? So
Yeah.
that's really the key element that I think so many people are missing, is like you have to pour into these relationships for more than just what's surface level. Yes, that takes time and effort, but it's so worth it in the end when you do hear the things that they say about their time with you, you know? And I think that's just something that's so overlooked because it's more work, to be honest with you. You
Well,
know,
you could also pour that time into your existing clients instead of having to pour it in the front end of your
marketing,
business,
yeah.
nonstop marketing, trying to find more,
That's
new,
actually more
new.
effort in my opinion. You know, that's actually more effort in my opinion. And you know this because that's literally, you know, that's just our thing. But you know
That's
that,
a
right?
separate podcast. That's a
That
separate
is
podcast.
that it's truly like, you know, being able to just like pour into the relationships you already have is definitely, like you said, far less work than it is to do that on the front end. And it's more rewarding, in my opinion, you know, to be able to see where some of our clients were 5 years ago when they first started with us, when I was a solopreneur, to where they are
Yeah.
now. So incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
it definitely is also weird sometimes to see like how many of my team members are incorporated into that profile when it was just me back then. And it's such a beautiful thing to be able to see the evolution of that. And I'm sure it's like kind of the same feeling for you, seeing some
Yeah.
of your clients who have been with you for so long. It's like, wow, like just the evolution's amazing. And so I think that goes to, you know, something else that's just very important to me is just like seeing like the long game of it all and like really being able to be a part of that journey while also providing these services. Like it's just not just services to me. It's much bigger, that it's a much bigger investment on both ends. And that's something that I make very transparent to our clients. Like, hey, if you're looking for someone to just do X, Y, and Z,
We're
that's
not
not
your
us.
people. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I'm very much want to know a little bit more about X, Y, and Z to kind of paint the picture better for us. You know, we will want to get to know you on a personal level because, you know, we're talking on a weekly basis, you know, like that's
Yeah.
all important to us. And so that's something that we've just, made very transparent. And so it's not a surprise to clients when, you know, that's kind of the questions that we're asking. And so I think that really depends on the person and what's important to you as a human as well. And that is something that's important to the whole team.
Well, even in the note, because I hear this all the time from agency owners, which is they have someone who starts with them in like the OG days when they got started, and they get like quote unquote grandfathered into the process. And you're like, didn't expect Stacy to be here for 7 years.
Yeah.
And so they end up being a long-term client, which is amazing. But you're talking about services. And I think that this is something that a lot of agency owners, they struggle to navigate because there's a million and one different ways in which you can structure an agency, right? Like you can have obviously the one-off, more intensive type of offers and services. You can have the ongoing services. And one of the things, because you were talking about ongoing clients, that I often hear is like people are like, my clients have been around forever and they're literally paying me pennies because the business has grown leaps and bounds from when we first started. And so like when they're updating their packages and their pricing and stuff like that, they have to kind of like loop in the old clients because the business is growing so fast. And so I'm curious for you, like when you think about your packages and your pricing and your offers and all of that, because obviously, again, back to your note earlier, like you're very multi-passionate, i.e. like you're like, I could basically solve any problem for you. Like just tell me what it is, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
But then obviously what we always hear with scaling is like standardize everything. Everything is a process, a template, a quote unquote rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
So it's this like kind of catch-22, right? Because you're like, I'm multi-passionate. I have a lot of problems I could solve. But then it kind of feels like I'm sending out custom proposals every other week, which is a custom process, custom onboarding, custom contract. And then you feel like, does that delay the business at all? So like when you're trying to figure out this duality between what the heck do I offer paired with, I can actually solve a lot of problems. And maybe even for you who's listening, you have a social media agency where you're like, I could do strategy, I could do just editing, or I could do full management.
Yeah.
And you have all these different things. How did you guys kind of come to distill down like this is the core stuff that we do? Or do you feel like you kind of still play more within the custom bucket in your opinion?
Oh, I 100% still play in the custom bucket.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it drives you crazy sometimes when you hear it, you know, when we're talking about it. But, you know, it's honestly, it drives me crazy a little bit sometimes too. But I personally, there's certain non-negotiables for me, and allowing for some customization is something that I will forever keep in the agency. Yes, it might hold me back from certain opportunities that could be a very much more rinse and repeat process, but it's what truly has enabled the connections that we have. For example, I still send a custom loom for any proposals that I send. I could very much delegate that to a salesperson or admin.
Yeah.
But for me, sending that custom loom to a client is what's already starting that client experience, that client delivery that we've been talking about, you know, like that right off the gate, like they're not even signed with me yet. And I'm already, you know, kind of feeding into that. So there's certain things like that that I'm just like, for me, I know that this is a big part of the client delivery and experience. So I don't want to get rid of that. I don't want to outsource that. I don't want to automate it, nothing. And I'm a fan of automation and templatizing. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I love that stuff.
Yeah.
But there are certain pieces to the puzzle that I feel, for me, it's important to keep on the customization route. I will say too, it's also just like listening to what people needed was kind of our way of like kind of like having our, you know, bases covered. And so, you know, when I'm talking to someone about like, you know, whatever problem they want solved, there are certain themes that we can kind of talk on. But I mean, when it comes to like what the actual package is going to look like at the end, it's kind of like Subway. You get your base sandwich and then there's all these different add-ons.
I love that.
Right? Like it's or Chipotle, whatever one you want to go off of, but it's the same thing. And so I think as long as I have my base, it's easy for me to customize off of that. But I truly don't feel I'll get rid of that because it's just such an important piece of the client delivery. And I think that's something that you should consider when you're trying to figure out, you know, what do you automate? What do you templatize? What do you standardize? And all that stuff is like, what's important to you in the overall experience, you know, and like what, and I hear it all the time from inquiries when they get our proposals, even if they don't sign with us, like, thank you so much for putting this time into this proposal. It's really, you know, it really made me feel like special. Right. And so, yeah, it really stands out. And I think that's another key thing. I think that people will start going off of like who they go with, not just off price or not just off like the deliverables, but also like who they connect with the more, who they're going to trust the most, you know? And so I think it's very important that when factoring in what you want to do and how you want to go about things is like, how are you going to make that person feel at the end of the day too? You know, it's very much like how we approach anything that we want to, you know, hire out for or, you know, purchase into or whatever. So I think that's something to just really strongly consider.
And so like on the sales note, because I love that, the idea of the looms, because like even for me, you can tell when someone sends you like a standardized email, standardized contract, standardized proposal. Like you're just like, okay, like hi Dubs Auto, how's it going? Like it's all just so standardized.
Yeah.
So I love the aspect of customization, and kind of think when it goes to like the sales side, you know, obviously you guys have done like promotions and you've done launches and then you've done like evergreen selling. Like when someone's thinking about the selling side of an agency, what do you feel like have been kind of like your biggest takeaways around, you know, what works when it comes to selling? Because like you said, you noted earlier, like I could delegate that to a salesperson,
Mm-hmm.
but like I don't actually know that makes sense. Or I could automate that in the sales process, but like that also might not make sense. So what are some of the things that you guys feel have really helped or supported you when it comes to scaling the sales of an agency?
I think adjusting to whatever everyone's kind of needed at the time of like what's going on in the market right now has been a big one, just so that we can kind of like speak to that. I do think that a lot of it comes down to like I'm still definitely like in the weeds of the sales for sure. And like that's not going to change. I think the only thing that I've been able to really change is like once I have that touch point with the client, then I do delegate it to the team on the admin side, like sending the contract and stuff. But like other than that, I feel that for me, like I've really kept that all within in my wheelhouse still, because like I said, it's the connection that I want to keep there in regards to getting to know that client, that potential client, and that who becomes a client too. So really keeping that has been something that I've toyed with a lot of like sending that, you know, changing that. But when we have tried it, like you can just really tell, you know, like you really do feel that like, okay, like you said, like, hey,
Yeah.
Dubsado,
Yeah.
you know, so
Title of the episode.
hey, Dubsado. But I think too, it's just like kind of figuring out like what should be you and like what makes it different by being you, I think has how I've decided like what to change in that selling process and what hasn't changed. So yeah, I think, and I mean, I've delegated other things in the business that have allowed me to have that time to keep things
Yeah.
on that personal
Stay in the
side.
zone of genius. Yeah.
So, you know, like again, going back to like what's important to me, well, that's important to me. So, like, what other things am I doing that I could, you know, outsource to someone else on the team so that we can keep things moving a little bit faster, a little bit better. So sometimes it doesn't have to be just in that, like, it can be in somewhere else too. Again, going back to whatever is most important for you.
Well, I think it's also like, I love what you said about the idea of like adjusting to the market, because I think it's also, and we were just talking about this the other day, like I think sometimes with agency owners, like there is always this balance in every business, but there's like what you love doing.
Yeah.
And then there's just genuinely what
What people
people are
need.
buying right now and like
Mhm.
what they're looking to invest to and the problems that they're solving. And so I think what's interesting to me that I hear a lot is like, well, I like to do blank.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I love that for you.
Yeah.
But also, what is your ideal client or what does the person that you're looking to sell to ultimately want and need? And then does your agency or does your service ultimately have that gap to fill? And I think that that does change just like it does in coaching, frankly. There's going to be seasons where, like we were just talking about this the other day, like the rise of podcast management has been nuts.
Mhm.
And so, like every single person that I know has like a podcast, you know, popping up left, right, and center, which I love. But it also means, let's just say you are like a full done for you, you know, marketing or media agency and you don't offer podcasts right now.
Yeah.
And podcasts are one of the top things that people are asking for as it pertains to content. It's an opportunity to not necessarily pivot, but to kind of just like adjust attention and say, like, do we have the resources to allocate to this? Is this something we should be considering as like a problem that we solve because the market has so much demand for it?
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that there's one of two sides. There's people who only adapt to the market and they have no, to your point, like Subway, they have no classics that they have associated with their menu. And they're all just seasonal all the time. And it's
Yeah.
constantly changing. And then you have the other people who dig their heels in where it's just like, this is all that I offer. I don't do anything else. I'm not listening to the market and like take it or leave it. And I feel like based off what you're saying, you guys kind of work the middle, which is like you
Yeah.
really have the core menu, but then you add on things based off of what you're seeing happen in the market.
Yeah, and if we have the skill sets to kind of adapt, why not do that then? Yeah, some things we'll have to learn that a little bit newer, but like we do have the fundamentals of what we need to pivot or not pivot, as you would like pivot, not pivot
Baby
kind of thing.
pivot.
Baby pivot
Yeah.
however we need to, right?
Yeah.
So like kind of a prime example was for a little bit we had a lot of YouTube clients where they wanted us to, you know, edit a lot of their YouTube videos. YouTube has definitely changed a lot over the last few years. So not as many people are on YouTube that we had in our clientele, but some of them have shifted to podcasts. So we were able to retain them because they're like, oh, well, we edited your YouTube videos. Editing podcasts is,
Yeah.
you know, somewhat similar, if not a little bit easier actually. So why not keep us in house for that? And then they did.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a prime example that yes, that was one of our main things, but then because it was kind of like not what the market needed at the time, and they were actually shifting into podcasts or like Instagram reels back then when reels were starting to, you know, take off, like we were able to shift those skill sets into whatever the market needed. And so definitely there's some services where like a different kind of skill set is needed, but there are some common things in there that you can apply to just shift a little bit to accommodate the different problems that are needed to be solved today. And I think that's why we've been able to be around for so long from when I was by myself or when, we are an agency, is that we've applied the same skill sets. Just obviously we've learned more things, but we've also just kept the same fundamentals in some of the services that we've newly created.
Yeah, and it also means that your clients can rely on you. That
Yeah.
they know, for like from a longevity perspective, that you guys are able to adapt as their business is
Yeah.
also adapting.
Yeah.
You mentioned something that I want to expand on because I think this is like the trigger soft spot for agencies, which is quote unquote bringing things in-house.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so like we often hear people will start to delegate to an agency, and agency owners, and I coach a lot of agencies, which is why I'm saying in general these things are coming up because there's big themes.
Mm-hmm.
People will work with it. They'll have a client that will work with an agency. The agency, in their opinion, will be hijacking and trying to understand their process so they can kind of quote unquote bring it in-house.
Mm-hmm.
And so for you, what is kind of your position when you're trying to communicate with clients and when you're trying to communicate in marketing? Because I know this is a thing that a lot of agencies struggle with. What's your kind of line in the sand, if you will, as to like when someone should have you versus when someone should bring something in-house? Because I know that that is something that even social media managers, they'll have a client they'll work with like 2 years and like, you know what, I've decided to bring it in-house.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that sometimes it can be difficult because like it's a long-standing client.
Yeah.
And so like how to kind of know how to navigate that with clients to say like for you, even as the agency they're working with, is there kind of like a line where you say to them, you know what, yeah, this is when you bring it in-house, or even in your marketing, how to communicate to people when that right time is?
I think that's a great question because you actually did have a client leave us after 2 years because they wanted to bring someone in house, and that was a hard one for sure. To your point,
Yeah.
because it's like a long time client,
Yeah.
like nothing was wrong. They were just like, it's time to bring someone in house, and I think those indicators are, one is a sense of control. I think people forget sometimes that agency owners do have other clients. And so when, that business owner wants you to be like at a beck and call, like that's not going to happen with an agency sometimes, right? Like, I mean, there's certain levels of time commitment that, we'll give to certain clients and stuff like that. But I do think that when it gets to that point that you want a little bit more control over their schedule and their availability, that's kind of like an in-house thing, because then if you bring them in-house, they're just dedicated to your business. Or when you have an agency, you have to be considerate that they do have other clients. Now, that could be a pro and a con, because I think another good thing of having someone who works with various businesses is different insights, different experiences. So there's a pro and a con to that, right? But that's usually one of the main things, is the sense of control and time management there that I find people when they're deciding between in-house and agency. I think another thing is just having them exclusive, like not wanting to share that insight of the business, right? Some people really want to keep that confidential and like tight, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's also another one is like, while it's a great experience for us on the agency side, sometimes clients are like, no, like I want to keep it very in-house, which is fair, which is totally fair. So I think that's another one there. I think processes and systems, to what you touched on earlier, is a big one, because when you are going to work with an agency or any contractor, you basically have to get on board with how they do things to a certain degree.
I think that agencies though feel the pull to go the other way.
Which
like
way?
I don't know if you agree with this, but like I feel like with agencies that I speak with, they'll sign a client and the client has their perception of what the delivery is going to be. So let's just say I'm a social media manager. The client's like, I have this deadline. This is how I operate. This is how I make content. This is how I communicate. I don't do ClickUp. I don't do Slack. I don't do whatever. And like, even for you, kind of to the earlier point, like you're like we're like a partner in your business.
Yeah.
So like, how do you handle people who potentially are like resistant to your process, but then in your mind you're also like, hey, like we're not your in-house team, we're in it with you, we really care about your business. Like, Sarah, I love your business, however, there's also a system, to your point, of like the agency technically is an outside entity, and as a result it has its own operating system. But I do think many service providers and contractors and agencies feel like they almost feel this constant like pull back and forth of the clients being resistant to kind of adapting to their process, and instead having the expectation the agency is going to adapt to them. But obviously at scale, when you have 20, 40, whatever clients, and the client says, hey, I don't use Slack, let's do email, and you're like, no, because obviously it's your process, you have to have it scale. Like, how do you guys kind of navigate that? Because obviously you're so connected to clients, but then you're
Mhm.
like, not so connected though, that we're going to
Yeah.
change our process obviously about it,
Yeah.
right?
I think, again, just being transparent right from the beginning that like,
Yeah.
hey, this is how we go about things. Again, it's not right or wrong. It's just being very transparent about that right from the get-go is very, very important. And some clients are going to have some resistance to it, but if you can explain the why behind it, I think that really opens them up to the opportunity. And also then on that note, you as the agency need to be ready that there's going to be a learning curve to this whole process too.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's something that's communicated very well on the onboarding part, is that like there is a learning process, learning curve, I should say, on both sides for the client and the agency. Because if you want them to get on board with your system and processes, well, then you have to also be willing to teach them and to support them as they navigate this whole new platform, this whole new way of doing things. Like they might be willing, but they're just going to need a little bit of hand holding. So if you want them to get on board on your ship, well, then you have to be able to support that, right? You have to give that hand to help. So I think that's a very important thing to think of as well, is that if you want that, then be ready to support that and give patience and grace to that too. And I think honestly, a lot of clients, yes, they give resistance because they're more so afraid and like intimidated,
but
they're not
I
like,
mean, ClickUp is
it's a beast.
it's
a
a
beast.
scary beast.
But I do think, again, going back to what we were saying, like, yes, there's a way that we like to do things, but we have made simpler versions and more complex versions depending on the client. And so I think that's why you need to have a little bit of fluidity there, because it's not a one size fits all as much as you'd like it to be. Like, it's just not.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that we do, is like we somewhat meet in the middle for sure where we can, or just account for extra time for that learning curve. And I think that's really the best way to do it. And on top of just communicating right off the bat if someone's going to want to do that. So I think that's another, kind of going back to the original question, a very important thing to consider when you are thinking of like in-house or agency is like, are you okay with that or not? Because when you bring someone in-house, it's a little bit easier to be like, nope, this is how we do it. Get on board. It's like when you work for a corporate, right? Like they're going to send you all the SOPs and that's just what it is.
Yeah.
Where some are going to be more open to collaboration and some aren't. So yeah, I think that's another big thing, like in-house and agency wise. And I think another thing with in-house and agency wise is just like the amount of support you're going to get. When people want to do in-house, you're hiring multiple different individuals, different salaries, different,
Training.
different training, different opinions, all that things. And so when you're hiring individual people, that's something to think about, where when you're hiring an agency, we already have our own thing internally that we've already gone through. And like, you don't have to manage all 5 people. You have a point person that can manage that as well. And at the end of the day, you get like 5 people for one, is kind of like what I like to say too, which, is definitely a pro when it comes to cost wise. And then just like not having to worry about having to train every single person with the agency. So there's definitely like pros and cons to it all. And I just think it depends on what you're ready for too as a business owner, because I also think that it's a bigger responsibility to have your own in-house team members than it is to have an agency. And like the difficult decisions, the difficult conversations, that all falls on you. When you work with an agency, you can talk to the main owner of the agency, for example, me, express whatever you're feeling, and then I have to take care of it with
you
my
have
team.
the burden of it. Yeah.
So that's a big one that I've actually never thought of until right now, is that, difficult things like that.
We'll note that down for later. If you guys see that in the carousel this week, that's why.
Difficult things like that you don't think of, right? And, something that I've said before is that I think that's a big misconception when building a team in general, is that there's a lot of responsibility that goes with it that I don't think people are prepped for or ready to kind of explore. And so I think hiring an agency over in-house definitely helps give some cushioning to that until you are ready. So I think that's a big one as well. And, just the management aspect is just the big thing too, is that being able to just have that one point person or few point people, and then the rest, like, the agency's figuring out behind the scenes, I think is a nice relief for clients sometimes, rather than being in the weeds of it all.
Yeah, I'm really happy you shared that, because I think that a lot of the time agency owners will get that from clients, which is like, I don't know if I should bring it in-house. Like, I'm not sure if the agency is the move. And I'm a big promoter of basically having, number one, a way that you're going to explain it to the client, because they are going to ask and they are going to be curious. And second, obviously putting it in your marketing. So there's also a clear, a distinguishing factor as to like how if you're ready to work with us as an agency, or like if this is like the right move.
Yeah.
Just because the conversation naturally led there of team.
Yeah.
I think, service providers, when you're kind of like a freelancer, you're just kind of, solo in delivery. I think the word and the aspect of team and all the things around it can be terrifying for some people
Yeah.
because most people associate team to be risk.
Yeah.
And frankly, if we could put candid, money.
Yeah.
And so there's this kind of fear of like, with agencies and a lot of agency owners that I've helped, like, I just don't know what to do because I feel like in order to make more money, I need more people. And then in order to pay for those people, I need to make more money. And so I'm just like, it's a catch-22. Like I'm just stuck.
Yeah.
And so I think something that, agency owners struggle with is like, number one, do I have to have a big team in order to scale an agency?
Mm-hmm.
And with that, like if someone is nervous to expand into team, like where do they even start in the sense of how do they shift their perspective around what it could look like, even if they're not right now quite ready to, start or expand their team?
I think for me, I was so curious about what my life could be like if I just had an extra hands and eyes. That's literally what I would say. It's like, oh, imagine if I just had more eyes and arms. Like, what could I get done? And so that is kind of where I was like playing around with the idea. I definitely sat on it for a little bit of like hiring even my first person. Like even like my brother was my first person that I technically hired to video edit for me. And like that was scary because I was like, now I have your cost and I'm putting this in your hands. Like, what if you don't do it the way that I would do it? What if you don't do it good enough? Right. But I think it's thinking about like where you are right now as a solopreneur, and you might not be there yet. You might not, hopefully you can catch yourself before you get to that point. But for me, I was done working 12, 15-hour days. I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe sometimes I still do that, but it's in a different kind of way. It's for a different purpose. It's for a different responsibility than it was then. Like I was working on client deliverables for like such long days. And I just like, I knew that wasn't something that was sustainable for me. So it was either I'm good with the revenue that I'm making right now, or if you want to make changes, well then make changes.
Right.
And so realistically, I was like, I can't do this alone. If I want to get to X, Y, and Z, not just revenue wise, but also just being able to serve more people, like you will run out of time in a day. And just like energy wise and just like factoring in life and like your own personal things, like, like household chores, like you just sometimes can't do it all as much as we'd like to, So for me, that was kind of like a big turning point, was like that. And then also I was like, okay, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You can go back to being a solopreneur. You don't have to, you don't have to stay as an agency. I actually know a lot of agency owners who were an agency and now they're not. I'm like, oh, okay. And it's just because it didn't work for them. And like, those are some things too. I'm not saying you can't make a lot of money by yourself. I think it's just a different way that you're going to do it. But if you want to continue doing it the way that you are, and like the clear issues is that you don't have enough time, or you're spreading yourself thin, or like things are slipping through the cracks, like that's when, getting help is going to be the answer. And so I more so saw it as like, what is it costing me not taking this risk? And then, that's kind of when I kind of hired, some of our first team members, and then just seeing the way I was able to just step into a different zone of genius was so cool. Like being a true CEO and like a true business owner, and like actually thinking about those things really shifted my perspective that yes, they are an additional cost to me. Yes, they're a risk for me, but like the amount of things that I can do and think of, like even thinking, like we call it mental real estate. The amount of mental real estate that opened up for me was like, wow. And like, I thought, Katie, who is my COO, I was like, yeah, it's just gonna be like 5-10 hours a week. Well, that quickly grew, when you discover and get a taste of what it's like to be able to
supported.
Yeah. So that was like a big one for me. And so I do think that, to your question, like, do you need to have a big team? No, it really just depends on the complexity of how you want to build out your business. People look at me and they're like, you have 8 team members. That's insane. I'm like, yes, but it's what works for me and it's what I want and what I love. So I do think that there's different ways, and it just really depends on your business and the way that you're going to structure it, and like, the amount of clients that you're going to cap that out at and all that stuff. But I do think that it's one of those things that you have to think about it more as like what it can really do for you. And like, I now, when like delegating, think of like what actually needs my brain and my body and my face. And if it doesn't, it can go to someone else. I can teach someone else that. And I am so proud of the team that I have now, because like literally everything that they do it 10 times better than I could. And it's such a great thing. And I think that just comes with time too. Like if, you are at that phase where you are going to hire one team member or multiple, letting go is probably going to be the hardest thing. But you have to you kind of have to see it differently as well. Like I think the biggest shift in becoming a solo team to like the team that we are today was like understanding that this is a business. Like it's not just like what is paying me. It's
Yeah.
like, it's an actual business
It's
now.
a separate entity.
Yeah. So like, how do you want this to be something that's going to support you today and in the long run? And it's honestly, having a team is a totally different level of motivation for me now. You know, everything that I do, yes, is for myself and for the company, but it's also for the team. Like I love that
Their goals.
they're
Yeah.
a big driver for me. And I don't think I would work as hard as I do without them.
Yeah.
And their clients too, but like I will say
Yeah.
the team more than anything. So I do think that it's some things to think about going into it, is just like, yeah, what is it costing you, and like what could be if you just try. And like I said, like, it's not that it's permanent. So just think of that too, is that it's not permanent. Why not like dip your toes in it and just see?
Well, I love the idea of like, are you really going to do this until you're 65? 12
Yeah.
to 15 hours a day by yourself?
Literally, I was sitting at the
most
kitchen
likely
table.
not.
Yeah, I was sitting
Yeah.
at the kitchen table and I'm like, what am I doing? I'm like, yeah, it's great that I get to pocket, you know, X amount of money and not have to pay any expenses, but like,
What are you giving up?
yeah,
Yeah.
and like, am I really happy?
Mhm.
Do I really have time to like go and hang out with friends, hang out with family, you know, build my relationship?
Yeah.
Like, no. And I think that was like a big realization for me, is like, yes, like I said, the money is great, that like you don't have other expenses, but
Mhm.
in the grand scheme of things, like, it just wasn't something that I knew was going to support me now, being, you know, planning a wedding, planning family. Like, that's
Yeah.
not going to be something like, there's no way I could do that. Right.
Right.
So I think that's a bigger question to ask yourself when you're considering hiring a team or growing into an agency, is just like, where do you really see your future? And do you really think what you're doing today is going to support that? And if not, there's a solution, and it's going to be scary for sure, but why not try it?
Well, you hit on something at the beginning, which I have to circle back to, because I feel like this is like a slogan of agency owners that I hear all the time, which is like, no one can do it the way I do it.
Yeah.
And I see people all the time who like basically refuse to let go.
Uh-huh.
So like,
Mhm.
even if it's something simple, like someone edits a carousel, they're like, but no one edits the way
Yeah.
I edit, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like for you, did you ever have that resistance of kind of like, oh, but like I'm scared, like if I give my clients to so and so, what if they don't do it as well as I do? What if the clients are not supported? What if they don't get the outcome that I get? Like,
Mhm.
did you ever have that fear? And I guess if you did, what were some of the things that you set up or that you worked on or created that you feel were supportive in giving you what you needed to effectively let go?
That's a really good question. And I think that's something that is going to be, yeah, a lot of people on a lot of people's mind. And for me, one was, I could not keep having that narrative in my head if I wanted to go where I wanted to go.
Mm.
And how do I know that the way I do it is the best way? Like, really, how do you know that that's the best
True.
way?
True.
Who told you that? Nobody.
I mean, you're pretty great, but yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, how do you know that that's
Yeah.
the only good way to do it? Right? Like, there's so many different ways to do certain things. And so for me, I had to shift my mindset that like, if it could be 80% of how I would do it,
Mhm.
that's good. And let us build on that together and make it a thing that we do together, like me and that team member, right? Like I had to realize that like, it could no longer be like, this is my way, this is my way. It had to be, this is our way.
Mm.
And so by letting the team member in on how I did it and allowing for them to give their input, it became something that was more of an our thing. And so that allowed me to kind of detach myself from like, this is my way of doing things, this is how it should be. And so it was a lot of mindset stuff, to be honest with you, of just realizing that like, yes, no one's going to do it exactly how you are, but what if they can do it better? And like, be okay with that. That's truly what you wanted. And I've talked to you about this too. Like, it's so crazy sometimes. I'm like, the clients could care less if I'm there anymore. And it's a crazy thing to say out loud, but it's truly what you wanted. You
Yeah.
wanted
Yeah.
your clients to trust your team, and now you're there. So like, it's what
But I do think agency owners and all business owners, frankly, struggle with that.
yeah.
Because you're like, the whole idea is like, oh, like I wish these clients would need me to do this.
Yeah.
Then you get there
And then you're like, what's happening?
and then you're like, please need me.
Yeah.
Because you didn't realize, it wasn't conscious, but like you get validation from your clients.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like when
Yeah.
someone needs you, it's like when someone's like needed by their kid,
Yeah.
right? And then their kids like leave the nest. They're like, I have no purpose. Like
yeah.
it's the same kind of idea.
Yeah.
It's when your clients need you and when they're so in it with you, you're really ultimately getting like
your own
yourself
yeah.
fulfilled from it as
Mhm.
well, right? And then when you delegate, I often find people go back to this place of like, well, what the hell am I supposed to do now? Because like I used to be in the weeds of this, and your role shifts so much. And I know that, like you were noting earlier, this is a massive part of your development has been like you went from a doer and like in client communication and all those things to being like, okay, that's not my role anymore. And now I'm leader and manager. So this is interesting because
Yeah.
it's a whole new different identity and operating system in the business. And even though it's like same business, different size,
Yeah.
your role shifted so much. So like,
yeah.
when you had to shift into that aspect of like really not being as client interfacing and not, necessarily being in the weeds anymore. Did you ever have that where you're kind of like did you ever like
It's
maybe
a
have
big
a moment of like a
adjustment.
drop where you weren't as activated and
Oh yeah,
needed?
sometimes I'm like creeping in on projects, being like, "You need me? You need me or what?" But like, it's like, no, leave me the fuck alone. Like, the team's really good at checking me. I will say that. They're
Guys,
like,
just popping in.
yeah, they're
Just
like,
popping
can
in.
you get out? Like, you're
Yeah.
not needed,
Yeah.
And like, don't get me wrong. Like when I'm needed, like they'll let me know. And like,
Yeah, yeah.
I'll be quick to jump in there. But
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing when the team can like really just like own it. And it's something to be proud of, honestly.
Yeah.
And so again, just kind of shifting my perspective of like, this is literally what you've worked years on building and like cultivating with your team, and it's here and you're going to complain.
Yeah.
Like, no, like just recognize that you did it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like you did that together with your team members and they are doing it so well and so proudly. And like, that's what you could have just asked for, So I think it's really just shifting your perspective of I'm not needed to like, no, like you've just built a badass team that like can really represent you and your company so well. And that's really, really hard to find these days. And so I think for me, that's where I really like just get that recognition or give that recognition to the team and really just like instead be proud versus like sad.
Now, here's a follow-up I have to that. It's like you're proud of them.
Yeah.
You know their qualities, you know their abilities.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know why the hypothetical I always use is Sarah. So if I ever have a client Sarah, I'm gonna have to switch it up. But if Sarah is your team member and you're like, you're gonna go on so-and-so's account and you're like, I know as the CEO, she's going to crush it.
Mm-hmm.
But my client is not convinced.
Yeah.
She's like, no, I want the CEO. I want to work with you because, again, you're the one selling them, right? So there's this disconnect between like, they see you in the marketing, they see you in the sales process, and you're like, great, meet Sarah. How do you transfer the trust from you and your team member to the client and the team member?
Well, I think as like the face or like the main point person, if you want to label it that, I really speak highly about my team and really, educate the client that like I don't hire people on my team that I wouldn't trust in my life,
Yeah.
And so I think that's a very important thing as well as like that introduction from that team member to the client of like really, showcasing that you've done the training. And obviously, like I said, you wouldn't have hired someone on the team that you didn't fully trust. It definitely takes time for sure. It's a transition period as well. Like you can't just expect to just flip a switch and they're like, oh yeah, I trust her, so like that takes time too. But I think it's just really allowing for that transition period and then just really like helping the client understand the steps that you took to make sure that nothing feels any different, even though it's a different person kind of taking care of the responsibility, I think is a big one. So I think that's a huge one that we've done in examples of that. And I'm trying to think of what else we've done. But
I think also like what I've seen with your agency and like for me, obviously, yes, coaching, like I know a lot of your team, but like also like your team knows all your clients. Like everyone knows everybody.
Yeah.
And I think what's also really helped is like even like testimonials will be like, I loved working with Ella, right? Or like I loved working with Janae. Like they're mentioning the team members as part of the experience.
Yeah.
Because they're recognizing them just as much of a massive part. Sometimes even I would say probably to an extent more than you.
Yeah.
Right. And then putting that in the marketing makes other people have this understanding of like, oh, okay, like they're not only working with Gabs, they're working with other people. So I think also like you guys do a good job of that by showcasing, for example, like your team taking content and putting that on your page and like your team being shouted out in the testimonials, like your audience in the marketing as well as getting primed before even coming into the sales process, which I think you guys do a really good job of, is like showcasing like there is multiple people who will have their hands in it. And I think, which again is different than some agencies. Some agencies, there's people behind the curtain, but you have no idea who they are. And so I actually quite like, again, back to the personalization, which you guys crush and knock out of the park, is like when someone's working on your account, they're not like this weird bot behind the screen that you have no idea who they are. Like you have a face to put to the name and you can message them privately if you need to. Like they're in your account and to the handoff portion you noted, the handoff is easier because it's so personalized. And like you're really seeing you in it with them and like you're overseeing all the accounts. So it makes your clients, again, like me being one of your clients, feel a lot of trust in the fact of like it's so personalized, it's so customized. And like when someone hires you guys, like everyone's been briefed on what's going on with you. I can only imagine the things they say about us because it's just like, oh my God, Kate. But there's just like so many things that I know for sure your team is briefed on, which is massive.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of switch gears for just the last little bit here. And this is probably going to be something that wouldn't typically necessarily be something you talk about all the time in social content, which is mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously, in growing the business so fast,
Yeah.
you've had to grow so fast.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you think about like day one, like Gab's freelancer sitting 16-hour days, and you think about yourself now, what were some of the beliefs you had to break in order to become the person that you are?
I'm just gonna say however it comes out, because I don't know if there's a specific
No right or
beliefs or
wrong.
anything,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, you are right that like mindset was a huge one for me. And I think it was just understanding like it's a we thing. It's no longer like an I thing. That was a big one that I had to like repeatedly say to myself. It's like a we. And that meant taking care of us, like taking care of everyone and not just for myself. And so I think, if I were to list off like mindset shifts that I had to do, is like things were no longer about what I wanted. And I say that to a certain extent, because I get that it's still my business, but I'm very much thinking of like the bigger picture now as well. And I do think that the other mindset shift to that as well is like, I need to take care of the people that are taking care of me now. Like I think people kind of discredit their team a little bit, where they don't realize that without your team, like you wouldn't have what you have. And so I think it's very important that I had shifted my mindset that like it's very important that I pour into this team culture. And that's why team culture is like such a huge thing for me, is because I understand like in order to have our team happy to show up every day, do what they do, they need to be excited and happy to show up where they have to show up every day for myself, for the agency, for our clients. And so I think that was another one. I think if I were to think of the old me to new me, it's like also just the level of trust that you need to have in yourself and in the people that you're going to hire and have behind your company is very, very big. And you have to just kind of let that in a little bit more.
As a question though, how do you trust yourself differently?
How do I trust myself differently? That's a hard one. How do I trust myself
It's so
differently?
Gabs of you, because I'm like, what's the mindset shifts that you had? And your instant was your team. So like, what about yourself though?
I think like
which also, by the way, is such a testament to who you are as a person and the values that you hold, which is why I love you to pieces. But I'm just really getting to the rock bottom.
Yeah, truly. How do I trust myself differently? I think, and again, I don't know if it's going to answer it like point blank, but I just know what I'm capable of. And I know that anything that I put my like 150% in, like it will happen in whatever way that has to happen. And I think that I let whatever is going to happen just happen, and I will figure out the solution to that. So just knowing that like I will find a solution always, and I will also always understand the different seasons that I go through in life and business, and I'll get through it. I'll get through that muddy water, and that like be ready for the challenges too. Like I'm also very realistic with that, is that like I know that not everything's going to be like sunshine and rainbows going to where I want to go. So just like being prepared for that too. And like there's always a way, always a way to do things however that's going to be. So those are some things that I in my head think is like a way that I trust myself a little bit differently. Yeah.
What about in those seasons? Like when you had those seasons in the roller coaster, as all entrepreneurs do.
Yeah.
When you had that season where you're like, oh man, here we go. Like in those moments, what do you feel was like kind of like the foundation or the base that got you to that next like peak that you ended up getting to? What sustained you in that?
It was just something that I had to go through that. I have to go through this in order to get to that next level. I need to go through this up and the down in order to even be qualified to get to that next stepping stone that I want. I think everyone wants to get to that level 5 before going through all the other levels, but it's like it's kind of just needed. It sucks 100%. Like I had so many
100%.
times where I was like, can I do this? But you just have to embrace that it's literally part of that journey, and it's going to make you stronger and better so that you can then give that to your team, give that to your clients. But I think that's a big one, is that like you need to understand like that's just something that you have to go through in order to get to that next stepping stone, because without it, how are you going to learn? How are you going to have experienced it if you literally don't experience it? And just like adjusting wherever you can to like allow yourself to go through that too. I think that's the beauty in owning our own businesses as well, is that we can adjust however we need to. So just knowing that that's there. But yeah, I mean, truly it was just and it's different having a team when you go through things like that. It's a lot more pressure, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
It's a lot more responsibility. but it truly drives me a lot more than it did when I was just by myself, which is so crazy.
Yeah.
That like when I was solo, I definitely didn't have the drive that I have that I do today. So I do think that's another layer to it as well, is that like it is such an honor to have this responsibility of having a team and the clients that we do, because obviously we were able to add more clients to that. But like, it's also one of the scariest things that I also have as well. It's a weird thing. It's like one of the greatest things, but it's also one of the like scariest things. So I think that's something to think of as well. But it is, like I said, it is the greatest motivator I've ever had.
Well, like, how do you, obviously, as you said, like adding more clients means more capacity.
Yeah.
Like, obviously there's logistical capacity of like team being able to do it,
Mhm.
systems being able to do it for sure. But also like for you, thinking about having more team members, thinking about doubling your business from where it is today and like how fast your business has already grown. Like, what do you do to open up your mental capacity to even call in that growth?
These are such good questions.
Thanks, dude.
Like what?
Thanks.
What is happening?
Also, because I know you don't typically talk mindset. So, guys, I get like 30 seconds here. And then after that, I'm not going to be able to talk mindset with her again.
To call in that mindset.
Because, you know, like they always say, like, you know, you have to basically, like, you're the lid of your business.
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, as you were noting earlier, there was this aspect of going from like the I to the we. And now you're like, okay, like it's not about me. It's about the team. It's not about just what I want to offer as a service. It's about what the market needs. And now you're at this place where you have this very successful agency and you've got clients that love you and you've got renewals and referrals coming out the wazoo. And like everything is really all systems go. Like there's really not massive fires, which is what all of us want, right? But when we think about like where you are now, and if you were to say to like double your business, what do you typically feel like you work on or you're constantly paying attention to make sure that you are not the cap of your business?
I think it's how can I pour into myself but also pour into the rest of the team so that they can grow with me. I think that's a big one too, is like they need to be able to grow too alongside you. It's not just about me. Right. So I think being able to give them resources and space to professionally develop on their end as well, while I'm also developing my own of like, how can I continue to support them? Because honestly, my main role now is leadership and management, like you said, and that means supporting my team members so that they can continue to grow and excel in their own ways too. And like also thinking about like where they want to be personally and professionally, where I want to be personally and professionally. Like those are all things that now are things that I have to consider and, you know, are my ways of finding what I need in order to make that space for that. And so I think that's a very important thing too, is just like, yeah, figuring out how do you leverage the team that you have right now in order to get there. You know, what are things that we're going to have to shift and change if I don't want to hire more people? Because that's another thing too, is like, I definitely want to stay like boutique style is what I call it. So, you know, there's going to be some shifts that are going to have to happen too. So I think just knowing that it'll never be a done thing or like a standardized way of doing things as a team. That's always going to change as I want to get to that next spot. And so I think because I already know that's going to happen and I'm like very much expecting it, that's kind of how I'm able to like, as you would say, I think you always say the word surrender, but like that's why I kind of surrender to the idea that like it might not always be like this. Like we might change again in 6 months.
Yeah.
You never know. Right. But I think because I am so open-minded on that, like that's what kind of allows me to like not feel a certain way when something hits me, you know? And it's like, okay, time to shift again, time to change something or whatever. Like I feel like that's kind of what allows me to do that. But truly, again, it's just like I'm always thinking of like, okay, how do I continue to pour into my support pillars, which is the team, so that we're in this together? Because I think that's the biggest part where agency owners kind of fall a little bit, is that they're so concerned about them moving up. What about the rest of your team?
Everybody else. Yeah.
You know, and I think that's probably the biggest thing to kind of emphasize, is that you can't just be about you scaling up. It's about the entire team together. So actually, now that we've talked through this, that's what's kind of coming for me, is that like I constantly want to pour into them. And I think that's the biggest miss that people have with teams.
Well, there's also like this theme of what you're saying too, of like this aspect of like anticipation and expectation, which is like you expect it to be hard. You expect problems to come up. You expect fires on their way. And it's just something I really want to reiterate and pay attention to, because I think there's so many business owners, not even agency owners specifically, but any business owner that both of us, you know, coach and consult with. There's this like shock and awe when something happens. They're like, oh my God, like there's a fire, there's a problem, there's a resistance, this is a low season. And I'm like, welcome to the party, right? Like it's really something that changes the experience of how you go through it when you have a perspective of the fact that this is coming. It's just a matter of when. Right. And so I think like even when you're talking about like I prepare myself for the seasons and I recognize like there's new levels all the time and like new problems we have to solve and ways we're going to adapt and like we're going to change probably at some point in the next 6 months. Don't know what it is yet, but like something's going to happen. Having that expectation, I think also is huge, because what it does is when you as the leader have that clarity passes along to the team.
Yeah.
So when change happens in your team, you're like, hey, we're getting more clarity in our values and we're getting more clarity of how we operate and the offers we're going to have and where we're going as a business. They're not shocked. They're not kind of like, worried about this because we haven't had change in a while. Like when you're constantly priming your team, hey, change all the time.
Yeah.
It basically means that they're primed when it comes. So they're not thrown off as well. Because I think sometimes there's, leaders or owners who are trying to reduce change for the team, where really your perspective is no change.
Don't get comfortable.
Yeah.
Never get comfortable.
It's a coming. Yeah. It's just a matter of when,
never get comfortable.
So the last question, just so we can close off, because I know that I literally am the kind of person who would do a 4-hour podcast if I could. If someone's listening to this and they feel like they're an agency right now, they're ready to tap into the next level, they've maybe started to hire a couple people and they're really like going for that next stage. If you were to be like, hey, I'm like the old wise ancestor over here with my little bonnet. You guys have to see Gabs in her bonnet. She's so cute. So cute. But if you're giving them advice of something that you would hold to be true, a belief they might have or a principle that they might integrate, what would be your advice to someone who knows that they have potential that they're not tapping into right now, and how to really unlock that?
Really stick to your own core values as a human, as an individual. Like, don't make it so much about what's the business's core values and mission. It's more so like, who are you? And stick to that and have that like kind of like exude into that thereafter. I think too is like, you just never know. You never know what could happen. So like, why not is my biggest thing. And really, really show gratitude to those who help you get to where you are. I think that's some of the biggest ones, and that can be applied in whatever way that you want to translate that. But I think gratitude goes a very, very long way, and giving into those who help you get to where you are is going to get you a really long way too. So I think that's a really big thing, is that like, for us to get to where we want to go, wherever that is, we obviously can't do it alone. So really make sure that you're recognizing that everyone plays a role in your success and where you're going to go, and just never forget that. Always like humble yourself on that, I think is a big one, because truly all the things that people want just can't happen by yourself. So I think that's a really big one to kind of just like really like hit you a little bit, is that like, you're so much better when you can really pour into the other people that help you get there. And then I think the last thing is like, just truly like, be welcoming of whatever comes your way, because there's nothing that I regret. There's nothing that I wish could have been differently, because had I not gone through the ups and the downs of it, I wouldn't have learned what I've learned. I wouldn't have experienced what I've experienced, because every single thing that I've been through is now an experience under my belt that I've been able to translate in so many different ways, in many different scenarios. And I think that's why every single month, every single year, I become so different in the way I handle things, because that's another thing when you're scaling your business, is like, you're going to be thrown so many different levels of things. And I think that, had I not had all that experience, like I wouldn't have been able to handle it the way that I do today. And so I think that's like a really big thing to just kind of lean into a lot.
Well, like the resistance is like the training of like your toughness for the next level, right? Like people are like, I want to have all the tools to be equipped for the next stage of growth, but I don't want to experience any resistance, right?
What?
It's like
how are you going to do that?
It's part of the process. And I love what you said, because I think like something that when I get like really in my feels about whatever is happening, I recognize that like I used to be a server who would just die to have an inbound inquiry. And so then when I think about like, oh, like I need more, or I need to have more money, or I need to have more sales, or whatever the thing is I'm looking to have more of when it comes to growth, which all of us have, I think it's also really good, to your point of gratitude, to like root in as well as to like thinking about the old you, like think about freelancer you who was like 16 hours a day and probably sitting in like a cozy onesie with like a coffee, just eyes burning, going and going and going, would be like so profoundly proud of all the stuff that you've done, and be like, holy crap, we did what? We have 8 team members. Right? Or we have clients who've been working with us for how long?
And I think that's something we talk about, is like, we don't take a lot of time to just appreciate how far we've come. we always see how far we have to go, but we don't appreciate how far we've come.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important thing, is to just appreciate everything that's coming your way and everything that you've been through, because like that's truly what you wanted a few years ago. You just forget because it's been so long. And like you just got to get to where you are today. Like it's been such a crazy journey that you just forget like all the things that were in between and like what you did want at the time. And so instead of seeing them as like a negative or like a daunting thing, like really just appreciate that like you actually wanted this problem at one point. You just don't know it.
Yeah.
You know, like it's something that you actually wanted, and like just like enjoy it in a weird way to say, but like enjoy it and really just like be present with it and like really just like sink it, like let it sink in.
Well, I think it's also like if it's not enough now, like truly, not just like, oh yeah, like I love my business. No. Like if it's actually like not enough in this moment for your business, there really is no point in growing it bigger because it's never going to be enough.
Yeah.
Like if a 10K month is not enough, then a 20K month's not going to be enough. Then a 30K month's not going to be enough. So like you can have desire for more, but it has to be paired with this aspect of like, wow, I'm like so proud of where I am, so proud of what I've created and like what I have available to me in this moment. And even if that is for some people like 2 clients and for other people it's 25 clients, like I do think it's a massive piece for people scaling, because otherwise it can constantly feel, especially in the online world, of like everyone's just like new massive milestone every Thursday. And you see that in marketing, you can feel so alone in the fact that you're like, oh, okay, like I don't know if I'm crushing it the way I perceive other people to be. And obviously both you and I know behind the curtains of businesses, so it's not always what it seems to be. But I think it's a massive piece of being able to just accept and be excited about where you are. And to your point, like welcome the fact that you wanted these problems, you wanted these realities that you have today. And so like appreciating those, but then also stepping into like, what could I do to kind of embrace the next stage where we're going?
Yeah, these opportunities, these problems are new opportunities, is how I like to see every problem that comes my way. You know, and you've definitely witnessed me take on some problems and I'm like, oh, it's an opportunity for us to all learn, to collaborate, to whatever. Yeah. And I think that the last note that I wanted to add to what you just said was that you need to figure out what does success look like to you, and like what is your driver, what is your why. I'm a big fan of the why. I'm sure you've heard me say that many times in today's podcast, but like truly, like what is a marker of success for you? And for me, it's not the revenue, it's not like, you know, all those kind of milestones for me. And for me, it's just like having the team happy to be here. Truly, like that's the one thing that really keeps me going every single day, is that like I've cultivated something like that. And so I think when you can find those indicators for yourself, it allows you to not be so caught up in that as well. So I think that's a very important thing too. And just also longevity wise in this business, is making sure that you are doing this for other reasons that aren't going to be dependent on a transaction or anything like that. Because truly, owning your own businesses, you've got to be motivated by more than that in order
100%.
to stay around for a long time.
So agree. So agree. Well, thank you, because today was so good.
It was different. I loved it.
We got to go on the other side of the business. If you guys haven't gone back to Gabs' other episode, she dives into all the influencer side, which is actually a very interesting conversation. It was super eye-opening for me around like brand deals, understanding how to build a personal brand, what to expect, and all of that stuff. So if you're interested in that, there is another episode, if you go back through the archives, that you can dive into the influencer side. And then obviously the agency side is the other leg of her business. So thank you so much for diving into everything today.
Thank you for asking some challenging questions.
Oh, of course. I'm not going to make it easy on ya. I was like, how can I really throw a curveball at her that she's not expecting? It was like mindset.
Good question for you guys to ask yourselves too, okay? So we're in this together. In this together. It's an us thing.
This is a coaching. This is a we thing. Okay?
It's an us thing.
Not an I thing. This is a we thing. So obviously we will have Gabs' social and all her info linked in the show notes below. So if you guys want to go connect with her, you can go reach out on Instagram at both her business page and her personal page. But all of that to say, you guys, we will see you on next week's episode. And as always, stay ambitious.